So I know this may look overwhelming. There's a lot of information here, and these are new data structures that you may or may not be familiar with at the moment. But I just want to give you some perspective in that if you haven't seen these, we've in fact been actually working with these behind the scenes. That's what jQuery utilizes a lot, so we are able to interact with it. For instance, every time we're interacting with the DOM using that jQuery selector, what it's actually doing is taking all of the DOM elements on the page and creating an array of jQuery objects. So we don't need to understand all of that right now, but I just want to give you some perspective that we've been actually working with arrays and objects a lot. It's just being behind the scenes for the most part. So now let's just jump into the console so we can play around a little bit more with some simple examples so you really understand an array versus an object. So you should go ahead and do this with me just because I really want you to get comfortable using the console as a playground and as a place to figure out and test out things that you might not know the answer to. Just like we did last time in Project 3, where we were able to test whether our Boolean value was going to equate to true or false. So opening the console, we can go into our dev tools here and go ahead and open the console. So let's just go through some basic examples. So let's go ahead and just start with an array. An array is really just a list of values. So let's make an array of food in this case. I'm not hungry or anything. So in our array, well, first we know that an array is going to be signified by these square brackets here. So there we just have an empty array. But let's go ahead and put in values. So our values in this case, I'm going to make them strings of different types of foods. Awesome. So there we have our basic array here. And to access our array, we can just type its name. And there we are, return just a basic list of items. And this is a pretty simple example. We're just using strings. But you can see in the case of our apartment object here that we are actually having an array of other objects. So the values in arrays can be many different things. They can be strings like we're using here. They could be numbers. They could be Boolean values like true or false. They could be objects like we see in the example here. They could even be an array of other arrays. So there's a lot of complexity. And I've included some links to arrays in the show notes so you can dive down a little bit deeper to understanding arrays. But one of the cool parts is about working with arrays is that we have access to all these new methods now. For instance, if we wanted to know the length of our array, we could say food.length, and it'll return to us the length. Just a small example, but I want you to understand that since we're working with a new data structure, what JavaScript provides us is methods to be able to interact with that data structure. So that's a basic example of an array, but let's go ahead and do an object too. So if an array is just a list of values, an object is basically a list of key value pairs. And that key gives the value a little bit more meaning and context in this case. So let's make a person object. OK. And an object, like I said, is always signified by these curly braces here. So that is just an empty object. And let's go ahead and give it some properties. So properties a person might have. In this case, it could be, well, a person definitely has an age. So that's our key. And our value in this case would be the actual age. And separated by commas, we want to separate these key value pairs. And let's give it some other properties. So a person could have, or does have, a height. And then let's give it one last property. A person has eye color, for instance. Awesome. So we can save it there and then access it by just typing the name of our object. And you can see that we are actually returned here an object. It actually says object specifically, as well as shows us all of the properties that we just created on it. So similarly to arrays, since we're working with objects as a new data structure, objects present us another set of methods that we are actually able to work with. So I've included also some more information about objects in the show notes so you can dive in a little bit deeper. But in this case, one of the most common things we'd want to do with an object is interact with the specific properties. So maybe I don't want the whole object returned to me. I just want a particular piece of information. So in this case, if I just wanted the person's age, how would I access that? Well, there's two ways that are commonly used in JavaScript. And so firstly, we need to actually give it the name of the object, which is person. And to access the age, I could use what's called dot notation, and I could just say .age. That's going to return to me the age of the person object that we just created. And there's another way of accessing properties on an object, and that is by using bracket notation. So we have dot notation above, and bracket notation is actually using these square brackets that you also saw in an array. And then in this time, you would pass the actual property name in quotes. So we can get the eye color by doing something like this. So I just want to expose you to both of these as you may come across both of them in the resources. For the purposes of this project, we're going to probably be using dot notation. It's definitely more common, but there are benefits as well to using bracket notation. So now that we have a little bit of a better understanding of arrays and objects, let's go ahead and have a look at the source code.